Since I was a child, I have always been fascinated by the inexplicable. I remember, as if it were yesterday, those summer nights when my grandmother would tell me stories about ghosts, beings that wander between our world and another that we cannot see, or at least, not always. She said that some people were more sensitive to these presences, and that if you paid attention, you might notice when something was watching you from the shadows. Over time, those stories became etched in my mind, like echoes of a truth I could not yet grasp. And although I grew up surrounded by rational explanations, where everything we could not understand was simply attributed to a misunderstanding or imagination, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more than what science allowed us to see. But what makes these encounters with the supernatural seem so real? Are they merely illusions of the mind, or is there something beyond what our eyes can capture? I have heard many versions. Some people speak of shadows crossing their rooms in the darkness of night. Others recount seeing their deceased loved ones, as if they had come back for one last farewell. Are these encounters products of grief or the desire to cling to something that is no longer there? Or perhaps, is it possible that there is indeed something beyond death? I recall an experience that changed my perspective forever. I was home alone on a quiet afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary. While I was reading a book, I suddenly felt a strange chill in the room, a heavy air, as if time had slowed down. The wind was not blowing, but the whisper of something inexplicable filled the air. I stood still, waiting for something. And then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My heart began to race. There was no wind. No tree nearby that could make that sound. I slowly got up and approached the window. Nothing, except the reflection of my own eyes, looking back at me with a mixture of curiosity and fear. But at that moment, I felt a presence. I can't explain it any other way, but there was something there, something I couldn't see or touch, but I knew it was with me. That sense of the inexplicable has stayed with me ever since. It wasn't a terrifying apparition or an experience that kept me awake at night, but it awakened in me a doubt that I have never fully answered. What happened that day? Was it my mind playing tricks on me, or was it an encounter with something we don't fully understand? Perhaps, I told myself, the supernatural is closer to us than we imagine, but we are too noisy, too busy, to notice its presence. Today, I want to take you with me on a journey into the unknown, through real stories of encounters with the supernatural. Maybe, like me, you will discover that the mystery of the beyond is not just a matter of belief, but of experience. Could it be that what we call supernatural is just a part of reality that we have yet to understand? Stories of supernatural encounters in different cultures. As I grew older, my curiosity about the supernatural not only persisted but expanded. I began seeking answers in books, documentaries, and eventually, in the accounts of different cultures. It was then that I realized something fascinating. What we call supernatural is not exclusive to one region or belief. Every corner of the world has its own stories about the inexplicable, and they are all colored by the particularities of the culture in which they are born. One of the first stories that caught my attention was about yokai in Japan. I had heard of these beings in documentaries, but it wasn't until I delved into Japanese tradition that I understood how deeply rooted they are in their culture. Yokai are not just ghosts in the Western sense, they are spiritual creatures, some mischievous, others dangerous, that inhabit the edges of our reality. It is said that they can be seen on foggy nights when the veil between our world and theirs becomes thinner. I particularly remember a story I was told during a trip to Kyoto. I was speaking with an elderly woman in a traditional tea shop, and when I mentioned my interest in the supernatural, she spoke to me about the tengu, a yokai with a crow's face and an elongated nose. According to the legend, tengu inhabit the forests and mountains, protecting sacred temples from intruders. It is said that if you venture too deep into the forest with an impure heart, the tengu might take you to a place from which you will never return. What's curious is that many hikers have reported strange disappearances in those mountains, further fueling the myth. Perhaps, said the old woman, we are not always alone when we walk in nature. This account led me to reflect on how landscapes shape supernatural stories. Japan, with its mountains and forests, creates beings like the yokai, which seem to belong to those natural environments. But when we look towards Europe, the stories of ghosts take on a different tone. In Ireland, for example, one of the most well-known tales is that of the Banshee, a female spirit who, according to legends, appears to announce the imminent death of someone. The first time I read about the Banshee, I shivered. Not because she was a terrifying figure in herself, but because of the power she had over life and death. It is said that her scream, sharp and piercing, can be heard at night by those whose fate is sealed. Over time, I came to know an Irish woman named Maureen, who claimed to have heard the Banshee's wail when her father was gravely ill. We didn't know he was so close to death, she told me, until one night, the wind began to howl, and amidst that sound, I heard it. A wail that was not human. My mother heard it too. The next day, my father died. As she told me this story, I could see in her eyes a mix of fear and resignation, as if in her heart she had always known that the wail was not of this world. What fascinates me about these stories is not just the fear they evoke, but the sense that the world is larger than what we can see. In Africa, beliefs about the supernatural are deeply tied to ancestors and respect for the dead. For a time, I had the opportunity to work with a group of scholars researching the spiritual beliefs of various African ethnic groups. It was there that I learned about ancestral spirits. In many communities, it is believed that the dead do not leave completely, but remain close, watching over and guiding their descendants. I remember a story told by a Yoruba man in Nigeria. According to him, when a family member died, strange things began happening in their home. Objects moved, doors opened and closed on their own, and on more than one occasion, someone felt an invisible hand touching them on the shoulder. For them, there was no doubt that it was the spirit of their ancestor, trying to communicate, perhaps dissatisfied with some family action or seeking to convey an important message. What struck me most was how the family did not see it as something terrifying. For them, it was a sign of connection, a reminder that the dead are never really far from the living. I then wondered, could it be that in Western cultures, where fear of ghosts is so common, we have lost that close relationship with death? Perhaps the terror we feel at spirits is merely a projection of our own discomfort with the unknown, with what we cannot control. Speaking of control, another story I discovered took me to the Caribbean, where the figure of the duppy is omnipresent on English-speaking islands like Jamaica. Duppies are malevolent spirits that, according to popular belief, come out at night to wreak havoc on the lives of the living. It is said that if a person dies with unresolved issues or resentment in their heart, their spirit might return as a duppy to torment those who wronged them. This idea that our actions in life can come back to haunt us made me think about how the fear of post-mortem punishment is present in so many cultures. I remember a Jamaican man, Mark, who told me a story about his grandfather. According to Mark, his grandfather had always been a tough and cold man, someone who didn't believe in the afterlife. But after he passed away, strange things began to happen in the family home. One of the rooms became especially cold, even in the middle of summer, and on more than one occasion, family members heard faint laughter in the darkness of the night. My grandmother always said it was my grandfather's duppy, unable to find peace, Mark told me. Perhaps he also had things to resolve, but he never wanted to admit it in life. Each of these stories opened my eyes to a world where the supernatural is not simply something that causes fear, but a force with which people coexist. In many cultures, the paranormal is seen as a natural extension of life, something that cannot be avoided. While in the West we tend to view it as a threat, in places like Africa or the Caribbean, it is part of everyday life, a constant interaction between the visible and the invisible. Finally, I want to share a story that came to me from Latin America, where the myth of La Llorona has terrified generations. The legend tells of a woman, desperate from having lost her children, who wanders the banks of rivers and lakes, crying and searching for her little ones. Some say that if you hear her crying, it is a sign that something terrible is about to happen. I met a woman in Mexico who believed she had seen La Llorona. She told me that one night, while sleeping near a river in the countryside, she woke up to hear a lament. It was a sound that froze your blood, she said, as if the very air was filled with pain. She stepped out of her tent and, in the distance, by the riverbank, saw a figure. Dressed in white, with her face hidden by her long, dark hair, the figure stood there, motionless, until, suddenly, it disappeared into the water. I never knew if it was real or if it was my mind playing tricks on me, she confessed, but that lament, I will never forget it. Through all these stories, I've learned that the supernatural takes many forms and meanings. Whether in the forests of Japan, the mountains of Ireland, the villages of Africa, or the riverbanks of Latin America, the mystery of the beyond presents itself in various guises. And no matter what we call it, yokai, banshee, ancestral spirit, duppy, or La Llorona, all these stories seem to point to a shared truth, that the world we see is not the only one that exists. There is something more, something we cannot fully explain, but that, deep in our hearts, we know is there, watching us from the shadows. What do you think? Are these just legends, or is there really something beyond, something we still don't understand? Real-life paranormal experiences. Throughout my life, I've heard and read countless stories about the supernatural, but nothing truly prepares you for a first-hand experience. Although I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, for a long time, I considered myself a skeptic. It was easy to get excited about other people's stories, but when faced with reality, I clung to rational explanations: the wind, a malfunctioning appliance, a wild imagination on a dark night. That was until things started happening to me. I'm going to share some of the most inexplicable experiences I've had, and I assure you, they are as real to me as the words you're reading right now. By the end, I hope you'll be able to ask yourself the same question I did: do we really know what's happening around us, or are we only seeing part of the story? The old house and the whisper in the dark. It all began when I moved into an old house in a small town up north. The house had that colonial architecture that I found so appealing: high ceilings, heavy wooden doors, and creaky wooden floors. At first, I was excited to live there. The history that pervaded every corner made me feel like I was in a mystery novel. However, from the very first day, I noticed something strange. The first night was quiet, or so it seemed. I was exhausted from the move and fell asleep quickly. But at some point in the early morning, something woke me up. A soft, barely perceptible sound that at first I thought was the wind. The problem was, there was no wind that night. I got up and checked the windows. They were all tightly closed. I went back to bed, thinking I might be paranoid. The following night, the same sound appeared again. This time, I was wide awake. I lay still, trying to listen more closely. It was like a whisper, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. I don't know if you've ever felt like someone is in the room with you, even when you know you're alone. That was the feeling that overcame me. I looked around, but there was nothing there. Over the following weeks, the sound repeated, and each time it seemed louder, closer. I began to notice other things: objects not where I had left them, doors slightly ajar even though I had closed them properly. But the most unsettling thing happened one night when I was in bed and felt as if someone was breathing right next to my ear. The cold breath made my skin crawl, and at that moment, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I wasn't alone in that house. I looked into local stories about the house and discovered that it had once belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century. It was said that one of the daughters had died under mysterious circumstances. According to rumors, her spirit had never left the house, and some townsfolk believed she was still lurking, searching for something or someone. I moved out shortly after the phenomenon became too constant. Whatever was there didn't seem to want to share the space with me. The face at the window. A few years after that experience, I had left behind the initial fear that the old house had caused me. I no longer thought much about what had happened, until something occurred that made me remember how fragile the boundary between the known and the unknown can be. This time, it was in a completely different house, a modern home on the outskirts of the city, with no dark history to accompany it. I was with a group of friends, celebrating a small gathering. It was one of those nights where conversation flows easily, between laughter and memories, until the atmosphere suddenly changed. One of my friends mentioned a local urban legend, something about a woman who appeared in the windows of houses, especially in neighborhoods close to where we were. We laughed and continued chatting, but something about that story left me uneasy. As the night went on and guests began to leave, I decided to stay a bit longer to help clean up. We were putting things away when, suddenly, I noticed something strange at the back patio window. At first, I thought it was a reflection of one of us, but no one was standing there. I moved closer to get a better look, and then I saw it, the face of a woman, pale with hollow eyes, staring directly at me from the other side of the glass. I was frozen. I couldn't move, not even scream. I could only stare at those lifeless eyes staring back at me from the darkness outside. Eventually, one of my friends noticed something was wrong and came over. When he looked at the window, the face was gone. It had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. We tried to find a logical explanation. Perhaps it was a reflection or the shadow of a tree, but there was no light source that could have created that image. That night, I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, the woman's face reappeared in my mind. The fear I felt was different from any I had experienced before. There was something deep, almost primal, in the way she had looked at me. As if she wanted to tell me something or warn me about something. The incident on the lonely road. Shortly after that experience, I found myself on a road trip through a rural landscape. It was one of those long, solitary roads surrounded by empty fields and hills. I had decided to take an alternate route to avoid traffic, and although I knew it would be longer, I thought I'd enjoy the tranquility. But soon I discovered that the calm was far from reassuring. It was late at night when I found myself driving down a stretch of road that seemed endless. There were no lights from other cars, not even houses along the way. Just darkness. The only sound was the engine of my car and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires. Suddenly, I saw something at the edge of the road. It looked like a person, standing still under the dim light of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, thinking someone might need help, but as I got closer, the figure vanished in the blink of an eye. I accelerated, my heart pounding. It couldn't be real. I continued driving, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. But a few miles later, it happened again. This time, the figure was closer to the center of the road, standing there, staring directly at me. And again, as I approached, it disappeared. What was most terrifying about that night wasn't just the appearance of the figure, but the fact that I kept seeing it. Throughout the drive, every few miles, that presence reappeared. It never moved, just stood there, as if it was watching me. Finally, when I reached the small gas station, I decided to stop and take a breath. The attendant looked at me curiously when I told him what I had seen. "Did you see it too?" he asked, with a serious expression. When I asked what he meant, he explained that several people who had taken that road had reported seeing the same figure, a woman dressed in white, standing by the side of the road or in the middle of the road. No one knew who she was or why she appeared there, but many believed she was the spirit of a woman who had died in a traffic accident years ago. Some said she was seeking revenge, others believed she was simply trapped in that place, unable to move on. That experience made me question even more the mystery of the supernatural. Could it be that some souls are trapped between this world and the next, unable to find peace? Or perhaps it was something darker, a presence that fed off the fear of those who saw it. The voice in the basement. The last story I want to share is undoubtedly the most unsettling of all. It happened when I was living in a rental house for a while. The house was quite modern, but it had a basement that I had never used. From the first day, I felt uncomfortable about that place. Something about the darkness of the basement didn't feel right, but since I had no need to go down there, I ignored it. However, one night while working late, I started hearing noises coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was the wind or the plumbing system, but the noises became more defined, footsteps, the creaking of wood under an invisible weight. Finally, what troubled me the most was hearing a voice. It was low and whispering, as if someone was speaking softly, almost murmuring something I couldn't understand. I decided to go downstairs and see what was going on. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the basement was empty. The noise had stopped, but the feeling of unease lingered. It was as if something, or someone, had been there but had vanished just before I arrived. Theories on the paranormal. With each of these experiences, I've been confronted not just with fear, but with a need to seek answers. Why do these things happen? What are we really seeing or experiencing? Over the years, I've researched and studied various theories about the paranormal, from the most conventional to the more esoteric. I want to share some of these theories and my reflections on them, not just as someone who has lived these experiences, but also as someone who continues to search for a logical explanation for the inexplicable. 1. The theory of residual energy. One of the most popular concepts in the world of the paranormal is the idea of residual energy. This theory suggests that certain events, especially those involving strong emotions, can imprint on the environment in a way that causes them to replay. This energy is not conscious, but rather an echo of the past, like a tape that rewinds and plays over and over. I've spoken with people who firmly believe in this theory, and some think it explains many supernatural phenomena. For example, in the story of the old house I lived in, the whispers and doors opening by themselves might have been simply a repetition of past events. The tragic death of the young woman in that house might have left such a strong energetic imprint that it still manifests, albeit unconsciously. The science has yet to prove the existence of residual energy, but there's an interesting aspect to this theory. If we consider that matter and energy are not destroyed but transformed, could it be possible that our emotions, especially the most intense ones, can somehow get trapped in a place? Some people believe that locations where tragedies have occurred tend to have a heavy, charged atmosphere. While this could be a psychological perception, what if there's something more that we can't yet see or measure? What's intriguing about this theory is that it could also apply to positive phenomena. Perhaps echoes of laughter, joy, or love also become trapped in certain places, though paranormal reports typically focus on the unsettling. In my experience, it seems that negative experiences are what manifest more readily. 2. Parallel dimensions. Another fascinating theory that has gained popularity in recent years, both in popular culture and in some scientific circles, is the idea of parallel dimensions. According to this theory, what we call ghosts or spirits could actually be beings from alternative dimensions who somehow managed to cross into our reality. This notion might sound like science fiction, but it has more weight than one might think. The concept of multiverses or parallel realities is not new in theoretical physics. Some scientists speculate that there are multiple overlapping dimensions with our own, and at certain times or under certain conditions, the boundaries between them might become permeable. Could it be that the ghosts we see are actually people from another dimension who, for a brief moment, manifest in our world? Perhaps what they consider a paranormal phenomenon is our presence in their reality. This theory might also explain strange sounds, like footsteps or voices, that sometimes we hear without an apparent source. Maybe in those moments, we are catching fragments of an alternative reality that briefly slips into ours. It's an intriguing idea, and although there's no concrete proof to support it, many paranormal experiences might fit this model. 3. Wandering spirits and the afterlife. One of the oldest and most deeply rooted theories about the paranormal is the belief in wandering spirits or souls that, for some reason, have not been able to cross over to the afterlife. Almost every culture has stories of people who, after death, remain trapped in this world, whether because they have unfinished business, died violently, or are searching for someone or something. It's interesting to see how this theory manifests in different cultures. In some, like Japanese tradition with its eerie, it's believed that the dead who do not receive proper farewell rituals might wander the earth. In others, like many Western cultures, the idea that a spirit does not find peace until certain emotional or personal conflicts are resolved is common. I remember that after my experience with the face at the window, I researched the area where I saw the apparition. What was most disturbing was discovering that many years ago, a woman had mysteriously disappeared near that neighborhood. Local legends spoke of her spirit haunting the houses, seeking justice, or perhaps just trying to be remembered. If we accept the idea that some souls are trapped, it makes sense to think that this woman might be one of those wandering spirits. What I find fascinating about this theory is the idea of transition. What makes some spirits cross to the afterlife while others stay? Some theories suggest that the way we live, or rather, how we die, can influence this. Those who die in peace and acceptance might cross over smoothly, while those who die abruptly or with intense emotions, such as fear or resentment, might remain anchored to this world. 4. The influence of the human mind. In recent years, an intriguing theory has emerged: the possibility that paranormal phenomena are not manifestations of spirits or external entities, but projections of the human mind itself. This is the theory of tulpa or thought forms, which comes from Tibetan Buddhism. According to this belief, humans can create entities or phenomena through the power of the mind, especially when emotions are intense or when a group of people believes in the same thing. Imagine this: when you are scared or in an elevated emotional state, your mind could be generating the same experiences that you later interpret as supernatural. Perhaps the face at the window wasn't the spirit of a deceased woman, but a manifestation of my own fear of the unknown. What if the paranormal experiences we have are, in part, created by our need to believe in something beyond the earthly? This theory has unsettling implications. If we can project our emotions or thoughts into reality, then the power of the human mind is much greater than we realize. I'm not suggesting that all paranormal phenomena are products of imagination, but in certain cases, especially in emotionally charged situations, it's possible that we're perceiving something that is a creation of our own psyche. One of the most famous cases supporting this theory is the Philip Aylesford experiment. In the 1970s, a group of researchers in Canada attempted to create a fictional spirit through collective concentration. They invented the story of a man named Philip and then began to invoke his presence during seances. Surprisingly, paranormal phenomena began to occur: knocks on walls, movements of objects, and even intelligent responses to questions. The conclusion was that these phenomena were generated by the collective mind of the group, not by a real spirit. 5. The vibration and frequency theory. Another intriguing theory suggests that everything in the universe has a vibrational frequency, including humans, and that paranormal experiences could be related to changes or fluctuations in these vibrations. The idea is that spirits, ghosts, or paranormal entities exist on a different vibrational plane than ours, and under certain conditions, our frequencies might align enough to allow contact. Some believe that the vibrations of human emotions, like fear or sadness, might lower our frequency and make us more susceptible to perceiving these entities or phenomena. Others suggest that places where paranormal events occur have specific frequencies that allow the supernatural to manifest. In my case, I wonder if certain emotional or physical states made me more vulnerable to experiencing what I did. Maybe it was my growing fear that attracted the presence in the old house, or perhaps the lonely road where I saw that figure had a particular vibration that allowed for that cross between realities. The idea that our own energy might influence these experiences is fascinating, although much research is still needed to confirm it. As I delve into these various theories about the paranormal, I realize that there isn't a single answer that explains all phenomena. What seems to be a wandering spirit to some might be a projection of the mind, or even an accidental crossing of dimensions. Perhaps the most important thing is not to find a definitive answer, but to remain open to the possibility that the universe is much more mysterious and complex than our limited senses and logic can comprehend. What's clear is that these paranormal experiences, whether real, projected, or the result of some unknown physical phenomenon, have a profound impact on us. They remind us that, as much as we advance in knowledge and science, there are forces that still elude our understanding. Maybe that's what makes the paranormal so captivating. It forces us to confront our limits, to look beyond the visible, and to question whether we've truly discovered all there is to know about the reality we live in. And as long as we continue to have these experiences, as long as there are people who see what shouldn't be there or hear what shouldn't be heard, the mystery of the paranormal will remain an enigma we cannot help but explore. After exploring this mysterious world and sharing these theories and experiences, I realized that the journey into the unknown is not so much about finding definitive answers, but about accepting the fact that some questions may never have a clear answer. And that, perhaps, is what makes the paranormal so intriguing and, at the same time, so terrifying. The power of mystery. Throughout this journey, I've met many people who, like me, have had unexplainable experiences. What impresses me most isn't the nature of these encounters, but how they've transformed people. Some who were once skeptical and rational have become more reflective and open to what the universe might offer. Others, however, have plunged into fear, trying to avoid places or situations that might reconnect them with the unknown. Over the years, I've seen how these paranormal stories, though unsettling, can profoundly affect our worldview. They remind us of our vulnerability and how small we are compared to the vast forces surrounding us. They also connect us to our own mortality. Perhaps that's one reason why the supernatural fascinates us so much. It confronts us with questions about life and death, and what might lie beyond this physical plane. The reward of uncertainty. In my quest to understand the paranormal, I've come to a conclusion that, though frustrating for some, is deeply comforting to me. Not knowing is, in itself, a reward. It might sound contradictory, but let me explain. We live in a world where information is just a click away, where everything seems to have an immediate answer. But mystery, the not knowing what's behind a closed door or who whispers in the dark, invites us to reflect, question our assumptions, and consider that perhaps not everything in life can be explained with logic. I've learned to accept that not all my paranormal experiences will have a clear explanation. Some may have been projections of my own mind, others could be phenomena not yet understood by science, and maybe some were genuine encounters with something beyond the physical. But by embracing uncertainty, I've found a strange peace. I've realized that it's not necessary to have all the answers to appreciate the mystery. What about you? As we reach the end of this journey, I want to ask you, what do you think about the paranormal? Maybe you've had similar experiences to mine, moments when you felt watched when no one was around or heard sounds you couldn't explain. Or perhaps you're a skeptic, someone who seeks logical and scientific answers for everything that happens. Both perspectives are valid, and I think part of the allure of this topic is precisely that it leaves space for both viewpoints. The next time you find yourself in a situation where you sense something isn't right, when you see a shadow out of the corner of your eye or hear a noise at night that you can't explain, I invite you to pause for a moment. Instead of dismissing it immediately or searching for a rational explanation right away, allow yourself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there's something beyond what we can understand. Perhaps the paranormal is not just a reflection of our own anxieties and fears, or it might be a slightly ajar door to a world we have yet to decipher. The end is just the beginning. What's most fascinating about this topic is that, at the end of the day, we are never really at the end. Each new story, each new experience, leads us to another question, another doubt, another mystery. And that's what makes this journey so exciting. Even after hearing all the theories and stories we've shared here, you're likely to come away with more questions than answers. And that's perfectly okay. In fact, that's exactly what I hope for. I want you to keep thinking, keep exploring, and allow yourself to doubt and dream. True mystery never has an end. It only has more paths to explore, more doors to open, more shadows to follow. And now, I leave you with one last reflection. What will you do the next time you feel a presence near you? Will you ignore that feeling, convinced it's just your mind playing tricks, or will you allow yourself, just for a moment, to accept the possibility that there might be something more? Whatever your answer, what's important is that you continue to seek, to keep that curiosity alive that we all share. An invitation to share. Before I say goodbye, I want to invite you to share your own experiences. If you've ever lived through something you can't explain, something that made you question what you know about the world, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story, and who knows, maybe together we can find new clues about what really happens in that space between the known and the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Whether you're a fervent believer in the paranormal or a skeptic seeking more logical answers, what matters is that you've made it this far, and that's already a reward in itself. Remember, the mystery is always out there, waiting. And if you ever feel the shadows move, hear something whisper in the dark, or see a fleeting figure around the corner, maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think. Until next time, and keep exploring the inexplicable.